I looked at the topic and it said the question was about hope, a new hope. And the real question in Pakistan today is, where is hope? What's a new hope? So what can a historian tell you anything about hope? Cliches, really. Some fun things from the past. But how does that talk to you today? When I studied history first, the major question I had in my mind was, how does history connect to us today? Because if it's really just about the past, then it's quite useless because it happened. Who cares about it now? What is it about then? A very famous history professor, E.H. Carr, once said that history is the interplay between the past and the present to shape the future. And when I read that, and it's a very famous book called What is History, that just really made me think, because everything that we do now, every passing moment, the fact that I came 3 minutes ago is history now. The fact that you heard all these people through the TEDx talks today is history. That is shaping, but then you are here for the whole day. That's your present. And you'll go home and you'll think about some of these things, or maybe not, and that will be your future. So it's a continuous interplay that keeps happening. And that is literally the only reason why we indulge in history, why we study this subject. Now, how can history relate to a new hope? Can it give any hope? Can it relate to it? Can it speak to us in some way? And I was reading once a very interesting book by a German scholar, and he said a very interesting thing, that history is also, so, where E.H. Carr said it's a continuous conversation between the present and the future, this German scholar said that history is an interplay between hope, anger, and courage. Now, this was very interesting. Now, why did he say that? He related it back to an old gentleman called Augustine of Hippo. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. He was there in the 4th, 5th century. He's a saint also, and wrote a lot of theological and philosophical works. And Augustine said that hope has two daughters, anger and courage. By anger, he meant anger at how things are. Again, when I read that, I was like, wow, he's probably speaking of Pakistan. Everyone's angry about the way things are. But then the other bit, he said, was critical, the courage to do something. That's the most important thing. And you cannot have the anger and not the courage, and you cannot have the courage and not the anger. So this is, I think, a very critical means through which you can harness hope. If you don't have these twin things, you really won't be able to understand anything. So, again, a new hope. How can we speak of Pakistan as a new hope? As a history person, when I look at the creation of Pakistan, a lot of it is about hope. One of the things I've just been writing about a few days ago is how the founders of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam, even at that time members of the cabinet, people like Sir Zafrullah Khan, Liaquat Ali Khan, all these other people, repeatedly use the word hope. This is a new hope. This is a new ideology for a new hope. Pakistan is hope for all the Muslims. Pakistan is hope for all the minorities of India. The question was always about hope. And I won't bore you with quotations from, these founding fathers, because we read them all the time, we see them all the time. I'll just tell you one very short narrative which I read in a book by Professor Aisha Jalal on Saadat Hasan Manto, which he published a few years ago. And in that, she writes of a very interesting incident that Saadat Hasan Manto goes from Lahore to Karachi, and on the way back, he cannot buy a train ticket. He can't really find a train ticket of the date that he wants to come back for. And he asked the local guy, the train coolie or whatever, would you sell it to me in black? Would you just take extra money and give it to me? And he's like, no, in the new Pakistan, this doesn't happen. And of course, it did happen eventually. Of course, it continues to happen. But that just tells you about what kind of a hope that Pakistan was built with. We also forget that about 7 to 8 million people left their homes and lands and came to Pakistan in the grand hope of making a new life, in the grand hope that as Muslims, for example, they would live according to whatever way they wanted to, right? That great hope brought people, who didn't even know about Pakistan. Again, I was reading this very interesting book where this person who's from the United Provinces, which is now Uttar Pradesh in India, is writing back to his family. And he says, oh, I've gotten to Lahore, but they tell me Pakistan is still ahead. Then he gets to Multan and he says, well, I've gotten to Multan, but they say Pakistan is still ahead. Then he gets to Hyderabad, Sindh, and they say Pakistan is still ahead. And then he gets to Karachi and he says, well, it's the sea afterwards, so I'm not quite sure where Pakistan is. Now, of course, this series of letters between him and his brother are quite funny at some level and sad at the other. But look at the hope behind it. He did not know anything about this land. He didn't know who the people were. You know, when he gets to Karachi, he says people here speak a strange language, Sindhi, and wear strange clothes. Because, of course, an Urdu-speaking person had never really seen those kinds of Sindhis. So has no clue over where the place is, who the people are. But he has this hope that this word, Pakistan, signifies a new hope, a new beginning, a new kind of a feeling. You know, let alone just an ideology, but a new kind of a feeling, a new kind of an opportunity. Again, a third example here. A few years ago, this professor from the US wrote this very interesting book called Creating a New Medina. Now, again, thanks to, I think, the last few years, everyone knows about the new Medina kind of a concept. But what is it in essence? It's really not recreating exactly what happened 14 years ago. It is the prospect of it. It is the hope of it. It is the ideal of it. It's not literally, let's go back 1450 years and create that kind of a city-state. It'll probably be like Singapore, you know, if at best. But it's the hope of it that you create this kind of a society. And that leads to another German scholar, again, a Marxist one, Bloch, a very interesting scholar. He wrote this book called The Principles of Hope. And I read that a long time ago, but for, in order to come and speak here, I reread it in the last couple of days. And it fascinated me because it showed that, it really speaks to us today, I think, in Pakistan. The first principle that he identifies, which I think is very interesting, is he says, hope has to be predicated on a utopia, right? You have to have some grand ideal in front of you, or else you will never be able to hope well. But he also says, and that's the critical bit, usually when it comes to but, we don't listen to the rest of the sentence. We hear the first part, the last part is like ... But the last part is equally important as the first part. The last part says, but one needs to be realistic that that utopia will not be achieved. So it's a grand hope, but with some realism, with some realistic ideals. And one really needs to kind of understand this. So if my lasting sort of wisdom to you is that hope is always something positive plus something negative. And if we see it in that way, we might be able to go further. I'll give you another example that Bloch talks about. He talks about how hope is both a personal and a collective endeavor. Again, a very interesting thing. If you do it in your own person, you wish to change the future, you wish to change the world, yes, that's great. That's, great effort. But unless it is collectively done, it won't really have the impact you really want to bring. And that, again, in the context of Pakistan is really important because unless we really personally and collectively think about things, things will not change. And in today's Pakistan, I think the collective side of it is something that we completely forget. So this is something that we really need to think of. Now, since we're running out of time, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of this from my own personal life, because a lot of people do talk about themselves and see, how these ideals and these things have come alive in their life. And a few days ago, a friend of mine reminded me, and I said, oh, I must talk about this. So when I was in year 8, a teacher of mine said, this is in the dark ages of the 1990s when all of you weren't born. At that time, you had to apply to get into O-levels, at least in my school. So you had to pass a special exam. And I was like, fine, I'll apply, and get into O-levels. And this teacher came up to me and said, oh, no, you are so average, you can't get in, so don't even try. So he blocked me from giving the examination. I came home, told my mother, she was a bit annoyed. She went to the principal and said, at least let him take the exam, what's wrong with it? And a lot of back and forth, a lot of back and forth. Eventually, I took the exam and passed. And this teacher was really angry because he said, I told you, you are hopeless. Why do you want to do this? And I said, well, let's try and see what happens. Well, 3 years later, out of about 60, 70 kids, I was number 3 when the exam results came, and I did pretty well. Then I forgot about it, forgot the teacher. A couple of decades later, well, a decade later, I do my PhD and turn up at Forman Christian College. And lo and behold, that same teacher is now a colleague of mine. And I go up to him and said, well, I think I'm still hopeless, I'm here with you. But then I also realized that I had a PhD from Oxford and he had a fake PhD, which was eventually caught. So, a hopeless character in school ended up doing at least something good. The other example that I really do want to give, and of course, some people here know this quite well. In 2016, I started this very small thing which I used to call a glorified conference. At that time called Afkar-e-Taza, now called ThinkFest. Well, Afkar-e-Taza, ThinkFest. And what was the idea there? The idea was to collectively hope. I went to one person who's right here in front of me and said, I want to do this. Most probably he thought, oh, it's him again with another crazy idea. But thankfully, at that time, he was in a good mood and he said, go ahead, do it. Didn't ask about the money, didn't ask about anything, just said, do it, it seems interesting. And we did it, and slowly, the whole idea grew, and just a couple of weeks ago, we had it, and about 25,000 people turned up for it over 2 days. Now, that was a symbol of collective hope, because what we did was, we collected the world's scholars, thinkers, opinion makers, and brought them to Pakistan and made them interact with the public here, with the common man here. And I'll give you a quick example there. A couple of years ago, when we were doing the ThinkFest, I saw this we had this professor come in from Columbia University. She was an Indian wearing a sari. And as she was walking down the Alhambra, I saw these 5 burly men following her. And I was like, oh dear, she's in trouble. So I ran up to them and said, why are you coming towards this woman? And they said, oh, is this Professor so-and-so? And I said, yes. And I said, we want to talk to her. And I said, why? And he's like, well, we are students of English from Dera Ghazi Khan University. And we've come here to talk to her because we heard that this is an event where you can actually meet the speakers. So I was like, wow, how do you know her? And they said, well, we read her book called Masks of Empire. We have read this, we have read that. So I went up to the professor and said, would you like to talk to her? Them. And she sat with them for about 2 hours. And as she was leaving and I was driving her to the airport, I said, what's the most memorable thing that your Pakistan visit had? And it was her first visit to Pakistan. And she's a big name chaired professor at Columbia. And she said, talking to those 5 men. Because I've given talks everywhere. I've given talks to numerous people all around the world, but those people traveled 600 miles to speak to me and interact with me. That is something that gives hope. But that is a collective effort. We created a team, we created groups of people, and then was the only time that it could fly. One of the things which I always say that the ThinkFest works because no one on committee is related to each other. In a country like Pakistan, that's also very, very rare. So these are just, one personal and one collective example, but just to highlight the fact, it's both a collective and a personal endeavor, and it has to look towards a utopia where you are realistic that it might not happen, but something that you aspire for. Because, and I'll end from where I began, this is exactly where Pakistan began from. And these days I'm reading books on Pakistan that were published before 1970. And if you ever get a chance, do read them. They're full of hope. They're full of the fact that Pakistan is moving ahead. It wasn't foretold that Bangladesh will separate. It wasn't foretold from day one that Pakistan will be the way it is. It's mainly because we lost our hope. So this is the time to recreate that hope, to re-establish that utopian ideal that Jinnah Saab gave us, and really try and achieve it in both our individuals and collective capacities. So I hope I've been useful to you to a certain extent. Thank you.